Yeah, go for it.
Man is for me a biological man. It's a difficult one. Every time that we name something, we assume something based on the culture. So I can kind of only explain to you what my culture told me and what a man is. And a man is actually someone with a penis, with, I don't know, masculine energy, and not even that. Um, not being able to get pregnant, just have the internals, as in, I don't know, just biological stuff. It's very difficult to. You can actually see everyone being a man or being a woman for most of the time, especially now because we are so technologically so advanced. So yeah, it's quite difficult.
So mainly a man is based on his anatomy,
Yeah.
his identification to the anatomy of having a penis, maybe just having main masculine energy. That's a man.
No, not really mainly masculine energy. That's difficult. That's a different one. It is actually having the autonomy of the thing that we call the male. So it's not really a man, but it's more like the male, and the male is more the biological version of, well, your sex organs basically, and maybe by average, but this is by average, your power within your upper body, your also sometimes your mindset, but all of that is relative. But there is a difference between by average. If we drop a man and a woman in the forest, you can obviously see which part of them is the man without actually having to see their sex organs. So so the autonomy of themselves is important.
All right. So there's a mix, like there are ways when a feminine body would act like a man, and at the same time, a man's body would act like a woman's or a feminine.
Yeah, and
Way,
this is such a
something
difficult
like that.
subject because now we're on the realm of man and woman and feminine and masculine.
All right. I do want to
Um,
ask if how you view your father right now. Do you think of him as a man?
yeah,
All right. Now, if you're going to look at yourself, do you have feminine aspects as well, or
I'm pretty
and
feminine.
are you ashamed of it, or are you trying to hide it?
Mm, less and less. I, I, I do think that I hide some of my feminine quirks, uh, but less and less. Yeah, I feel more comfortable now that I'm more in line with myself.
So you're less um hiding that part of you who's like trying to please people because you just want to show up like this as a man, as a masculine person, fully. You're just more aligning your energies in to who you are expressing as them.
Um, can you reframe the question and make it shorter because it's
So
what
you're
exactly are you asking?
so you mentioned that you're less and less hiding feminine aspects of you, right? Or feminine ways of being. And
Hmm.
what I'm asking is, you're not as ashamed now that you're congruent with your being. You're not as ashamed of hiding that feminine aspect and just showing more masculine aspects just because you want to please the society or whoever it is that you want to
Oh
please.
no, it's not really that I want to please society. I didn't really know that I was hiding it, the feminine part, at the beginning, the first 28 years of my life. I'm 30 right now, almost 31. Holy fuck. Um, um, So it's more like a discovery, learning to listen to myself and exploring what exactly does this mean to be in this body, to integrate my manly, manly characteristics, masculine characteristics, and integrating the feminine characteristics based on the thing that I choose to be. Yeah, based on the thing that I choose to be. Yeah, and the funny thing is, because I'm integrating my feminine, I'm more completed as a man, I think. Or that's the way that I feel.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
So the more you've integrated your feminine aspects, characteristics, the more you feel as a man. I'd love to know what's
Uh,
the reason behind it.
yeah, not the more that I feel as a man, but the more that I feel a man. What in my perfect ideal world is a man, a combination of um, being in touch with his emotions and also being straightforward and thriving in every way, in every aspect of his life. And also a protector role. A protector role in general is more masculine side. And now that I've stepped more into my feminine part, I notice myself protecting more, creating the container for people to play in, basically. And I love that. I really love that. So it's the integration of the masculine and the feminine to be a man, to be a better man, and that contains characteristics that are also feminine and masculine at the same time. It's such a strange paradox. It's very
Yeah.
difficult to explain.
I want to say something, but I just for the purpose of the interview, I want to go with the other questions too, because I want to bridge or talk more about that. But another thing, what is the difference between a man and a boy?
Oh, mm, responsibility.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Can
the
you
man has.
expound to that?
Yeah, the man has not really more responsibility, but the boy doesn't have responsibility. And if you notice somewhere somehow that he has responsibility, then he is becoming a man.
So what is responsibility then?
um, is choosing how you want to react. Are you able to respond? Responsibility is the word, the English word, as in, are you able to respond the way that you want it to be? And if you are control on how do you want to respond in a certain situation, then you are responsible for that.
Yeah, that's a beautiful answer, by the way. So like when someone's a man, uh, I'm not being an interviewer right now, but like I, I'm putting in, but when someone's a man, some people react and some people respond. I mean, repress. So it's not mainly coming from a place of being responding or responsive. And typically, immaturity comes from not being able to respond.
Not being able to respond or are being able to respond.
immaturity or being a boy means you're not responsible, right? So that means that you're more reactive to what's being given to you or being shown to you, and or could be repressive, versus being mature as a man means you are more responsive, so you're responsible.
Yeah, you're 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 responsible for the response that you are giving.
Yeah.
I think.
Now, what are your thoughts? There are these phrases about how women or other people or even men at the same time have this phrase, boys will be boys, men will be men, and like when, especially whenever they see a woman's body, or in the realm of sexuality and romanticism. What are your thoughts on that?
What are my thoughts about men will be men or boys will be boys? That's the question,
Yeah,
mostly.
yeah, that phrase.
It's something that Vision said. It's peer pressure from dead people, basically.
Peer pressure.
Yeah. Um, if someone says to me as if I'm, I don't know, jumping in the river and just jumping around and doing crazy stuff, and they're like, boys will be boys. That's someone's assumption based on what they see compared to what they understand as a boy or as a man or whatever. And they kind of try to label that on top of me. And the
Okay, so
thing is, or at least that what I try to do, is releasing the labels as a whole, because the labels in general, words in general, are limitations of the human experience. Yeah.
now there's this signs of there's this limitations, or like that's part of the society we call, like it's now being called like toxic masculinity. And the typical signs of this is like men being homophobic, men being promiscuous,
Yeah,
violent,
but it's not
and
really the science. Science is a
aggressive.
real different thing.
Yeah. So like, what are your thoughts on that toxic masculinity, and has it impacted your life to a certain degree?
Well, yeah. Were you in the coaching call with Ajit today?
Yeah.
Ah, that comment that he made was based on toxic masculinity. The man's probably in love with you. That's why he tries to bribe you with his 30% of the company. I'm like, guys, no, this is not. This is such a wrong assumption, or such a massive assumption. I don't know if it's wrong. Could be right, but he made such massive assumptions based on his own. Oh, because this happens so often. That's his idea of masculine, negative masculine energy, toxic masculinity. Um, there is something that's called toxic masculinity. There is. Um, but it's the same thing as toxic femininity. And it's mostly based on the ego, I think. The idea of I know it better and you should listen to me because I'm forcing you. That's toxic part. And if we can truly release force towards each other, then we don't actually have a toxic femininity or masculine anymore. That's the thing that makes it toxic. me forcing you to do stuff. And I really don't like the connotation between, because it's not real toxic masculinity or femininity, it's toxic humanity. It's a behavior that has been toxic. And the behavior is forcing other people to do stuff.
All right. So another thing is like, what is, if there's a message as a life coach or as a man yourself, what is a message that you wanna share to the culture to contribute healing this toxicity, this behavior of probably negative behavior?
Hmm. I live under the assumption that all humans are good as a default. And whenever someone experienced trauma, or whenever someone shows negative behavior, that is like 99.999% of the time based on traumas of that person. And if you see some negative behavior, then it's actually being open to ask stuff about the traumas. Because underneath all of it, everyone is so freaking amazing. And the sooner that we realize that, the sooner we can get out of the ego part. And be careful with assumptions. That's also a big one. But the first one is the most important one.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful answer. Yeah, coming from a place of realizing our traumas, maybe even healing it too, right? So that we react less and respond more to people.
Yeah.
But this is like, so I'm down to the last three questions. These are basic questions. What do you identify as?
A spirit.
A spirit. Nice, nice. Yeah, it's the third time I've heard. Yeah, a soul,
I
a
really
spirit.
like these questions, Frans.
Because like, and I'm going to answer that myself. I view myself as a soul too. So like, right, it's
Nice.
really nice. We just have attachments to this body,
Yeah. Yeah.
enjoying this world as my observation of Frans. And you yourself, your observation is Tim, just happened to be named Tim.
Exactly.
Uh, uh, Another, in line to that other question, what is your take on the confusion of gender identity roles these days? Because I'm not sure if it's the same there in your country, but here in Canada, there's this gender identity like battle, especially in like way back in 2018,
I
right?
followed a
It
lot
was
of
really
Jordan
controversial.
Peterson, so
Yeah,
I kind of understand the. Well, I don't know how bad it actually is, but so I can only kind of explain what I see it in the Netherlands and in my culture, because I don't know it in Canada. But I kind of understand why people want to throw away their labels and just let me be me, however I feel. That's great. But then the toxicity comes in, and actually telling people, you should call me this, you should call me that. Because that creates the force, that creates the I choose what you have to do. And if it's really mutual respect, then I wouldn't be bothered with it. And it's not something to promote. Same as sexuality for that case, as in if you're straight, gay, or whatever other possibilities there are. I don't really care. It's not my thing to ask that of people and to, it's not my thing. So yeah, labels in general are really destructive. And I understand you want to break down the limitations, as in what is a man and what is a woman and what is all the other options. But the downside is you have to kind of replace that with something else. And the next level where we are probably going towards what I see is right now everyone is so everything at the same time that now people are opening up, as in we're not really a man or a transgender or this or that. We're something underneath that. And I actually think that this has been a plan for many great thinkers who actually see this happening, already saw this happening years ago, and identifying, we are still identifying ourselves as a man, as a woman, as a culture, as a sexuality, as a group. So I think they splintered out so much of the group, as in the whole ILGBTQ plus form, that everyone's like, guys, I don't understand it anymore. Let's just accept everyone the way they are. In such a level that everyone is the spirit, of everyone is the soul. That's what I think.
That's good. That's great.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice. It's another is the same answer with most. This is what I've noticed. It's pretty much the same answer with people who's done some work on themselves versus the, because I've also interviewed others as well who um in just a typical space of working, and they're also going to church and all that, but there's a there's a distinction when people answer
And the
that
distinction
question.
between the people who are working on themselves or the people who don't.
Like, say for example, for someone who's like, yeah, people who are working on themselves, or and people who don't. For example, for those who are following a certain rules of certain religion, they would say that a man, like the confusion of the gender identity roles is just like confusion itself. It's like the devil is at play and all those things. So like
Yeah.
there's that, right? And there's just only two cases, a man and a woman, and it's interesting. And what's interesting to me is, and a pattern that I've been seeing is when people really work on themselves, would always answer that they are a spirit, and it's just me expressing as who I am as a spirit, as a soul. And this gender, it's this label, it's an identification for me, for others to know this is who I am, but I express myself as who I am and not really attached to that label.
Yeah. Nice.
But thank you for the answer. So if there's a men's group that you want to join, or what is an attribute or quality that you want to a men's group to have, for a men's group that is all inclusive?
A men's group.
That's in, yeah.
I don't know. And then all inclusive in what form?
It it also includes because like I've been working on this still probably next 2 years or so, when I'm going to start this group. And I don't want the group to be just all men and all, I mean, all like, focus on masculinity and the old way of how we view ourselves as men. Um, so there could be people who identify as gays, as bi, as trans, or queer who's going to be joining the group. So if there's an attribute that a group like this would have, and for you maybe who's going to join that group, what is it that you want to join? Someone like you. I'm not saying to, like, if you're going to
Um,
market that group as well, what would be an attribute of
respect,
quality? Okay, cool.
I think,
Yeah.
and yeah, acceptance. And acceptance is a difficult one. Being full acceptance of the other person, as if they are you at the same time.
Nice. So it's more like seeing the person for who they are and accepting them for who they are.
Yeah, and you don't really have to see them yet because it's, even though I'm seeing you right now, but I don't see the full version of you. But every time that you speak or that you have an idea or that you're stumbling about something, I don't know, they're like, okay, let him stumble and let him search for words and let him make mistakes and let him just be in full acceptance of you making your own journey somehow. That would be ideal.
That's nice. You really have said a lot of words of wisdom in this interview, Tim, and thank you for that.
I've thought about this subject for, well, 4 years, 5 years, basically.
That's great. It's just been recently since I've dived into this. It's just been an idea or since 2018 because of the entire topic of Jordan Peterson and all those things. But now I've just been thinking of writing this or really fully finishing the book around this topic.
What kind of speakers have you followed in the meantime?
It's not mainly speakers, it's mainly men or people who identify as men or gay or um, trans even. I haven't interviewed someone who's trans as a woman and now identify was a woman then was a body of a woman and now identifies themselves as men. But like I've just received uh, an invitation, I guess, or like a referral. But yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it's been quite interesting because I've been, well, I still am pretty conservative most of the time. Most of the ideas that I have are like, slow down before we going to change on the deepest fabrics of society. Slow down. Let's talk about this. That's for me the conservative part.
Yeah.
Um, and it created me actually following a lot of conservative thinkers.
Oh,
Um, and the thing
do
is,
you
the
and are you on the side of Jordan Peterson's those or like what are your thoughts about his
I
ideas
was
and
for a long time.
philosophy?
Um, and right now, what I'm seeing is that Jordan Peterson is labeling people and talking out of fear and talking out of gaps. And I'm actually thinking about writing about that, what I see that Jordan Peterson is missing in this argument. Because he's
Yeah,
missing something.
that's yeah, definitely. That's a good topic, by the way. If you're going to write a blog post at some point or whatnot, that's a really good topic. That's something that I wanna tackle as well. Hopefully one of these days, because he lives here in Canada in the same city as me, I'd be able to interview
Nice.
him at some point, but who knows?
Do, do you live in Toronto as well?
Yeah,
Oh, nice.
yeah. I passed by University of Toronto where he taught several times. Yeah.
Ah, it's so special because my journey has been. I was very, very angry at the beginning. I really didn't understand the world. And now I slowly went further with my development. And now I'm at a certain point that I can resonate with people who actually experience that part and help them level up internally. And that's also why I'm reading Power vs. Force right now, because everything I know why I was so angry. Because I was fearful, I was scared, I had a lot of desires. Um, I was talking from a place of pride and judgment. And I think that all of this is kind of part of the plan. And even though it's not really part of the plan, I still see it. Jordan Peterson jumped in a certain gap that we had in the society, which uplifts certain amount of people like me to go to Jordan Peterson level and then move upwards. So Jordan Peterson is an amazing character for the people who have a conscious level who are beneath him and help them level up towards a certain point that creates, Jordan Peterson, I'm done with you. And then move upwards towards different speakers, different thinkers. And right now, I'm in a certain level that I notice speakers that I'm following aren't doing me justice enough anymore. And now I'm transcending them as well. That's my thought. Yeah,
Great. Yeah, it's good. All right.
great.
Thank you so much for this interview, Tim.
Yeah, you're welcome. I
If
really
there's
liked it.
anything, if sure, if there's anything I can help you with, like, what do you need help in a project or something that you have right now?
Great. I might take you up on that. Yeah, I might have some ideas. I'll think about it.
All right, just let me know. And thank you so
um,
much for this interview. This is a big help to my book, and
great.
I'd love to put in some of your phrases in there as well.
Yeah, you can, if you want, you can mention my name and you can do everything.
Definitely, definitely.
Just
Every yeah,
enjoy.
yeah,
um, is it possible that I get a copy from this recording?
sure. As soon as
Great.
it's on the cloud, I'll send you the copy.
Perfect. Thank you very
All
much.
right.
And then,
You're welcome.
yeah, enjoy your evening, I think.
Sure. Definitely.
Bye
Bye bye.
bye.